I'm just one place to another. It's Roman. Roman.
I'm going to start this show.
Really good in religious school.
My name is Marion Marks, and I must admit I was somewhat shocked last night to find that the library had pulled out of the forum. And I issued an immediate public records request, which is what a lot of what we're going to talk about. And I got an email, which to me, I refer to as a smoking gun, that said, you need to cancel and reschedule this. Who set the agenda? Why are all those radical critics of government the only ones on board? Now, I'm not going to go into anything else in here. I don't know how the library came up with this distinguished group minus Danny Lawler. And, originally, Willie wasn't on the panel, but he asked to add some commentary. And I said, Willie, since we're missing one right now, why not get in? The bottom line is we believe in what this is all about. Elliot Stonecipher, and I'm going to read in the list they were given to me, is a political consultant, analyst with Events Management. Tom Arsenault is an attorney with Blanchard, Walker, O'Quinn, and Roberts. Tom, I have a lengthy bio. I'm going to refrain from that with this group. Allison Bath is the content editor of The Times. Jeff Everson is a councilman for District B of Shreveport. And Willie Bradford is a senior commentator on lots of things. What's your official capacity, Willie?
A concerned citizen.
Well, we're all concerned citizens. I am going to follow somewhat the format of allowing each of you to make a brief intro. And let's start at this end with the one lady on the panel. Allison, would you start? And let's just go through it. I don't want to be a moderator. I just want this to flow, if possible.
I will just give you a little bit of brief information. I joined the Times. I think it's going to be 7 years ago as an investigative reporter. I started on April 1st, April Fool's Day. Joke was on me. I have since that time filed dozens and dozens of public records requests with the city, with the state, with the feds. One of the things that discourages me the most is that very few people know the public records law. And even more discouraging is very seldom do many journalists know the public records law. And it's so important for us to know that law, know what our rights are, and that when we work with public officials, we understand the law so that we can understand what some of their concerns may be. And also that when they do put up sometimes roadblocks, and not all public agencies do that. In fact, quite often I get the data or the information that I need. There are some times where officials or agencies play what I would call little games, like I ask for it in electronic or in a database, and I get a whole bunch of paper records. But for the most part, we work through any issues, and I get the public records, and the public gets to know. And the most important thing to me is transparency. When I get data, I share that data with you. It either goes to you in a database, or I put those records up on our website. As I did today, I want to share a little story because I did file public records requests for the emails that transpired between the library and various elected officials on the commission. And the person at the library who took that responded to that request within minutes, and I had that data waiting for me, those emails waiting for me this morning. And that's the way it's supposed to work. And that young woman knew the law and knew what her responsibilities were. On the other side, the Caddo Commission, also I sent them a request. They also are working with me to fulfill it, and I will have that from them. It's going to take them a little bit longer, but they'll have that to me tomorrow. So that's a good example of how even in situations like this, public agencies do work with us and to get the information that we need.
Well, thank you. And I'm Jeff Everson, and I guess I'm here to kind of give the perspective of somebody who's subject to a number of public records requests. Just to give you a little brief background, I was elected to Shreveport City Council in 2010, but it wasn't my first time being involved in government. For about 6 years, I represented Senator Mary Landrieu in North and Central Louisiana. I was her aide for that region of the state. And prior to that, I had worked for, my first job out of college, I worked for the city of Memphis, doing development with creating public-private partnerships to get development done there. So I've worked most of my professional life in government in some way or another. I'm very familiar with the requirements of when you are using government resources, when you're conducting government business, all of that is, that's going to be subject to a public records request, and I've gotten fairly accustomed to that. But on the flip side, it's kind of hard sometimes to, there are challenges with it. There are limitations of public records requests, because sometimes even though you may be getting written dialogue or things that are written in an official capacity, sometimes you do miss out on the context of maybe a situation in which that happened, or some subtext of a conversation. That can be missing from these things oftentimes, and so I think that is on the user's side can be a limitation. One of the things I really like in the position I'm currently in, it's a part-time role, and so I've got a lot of other things going on in my life, and it's my brain can be a bit scattershot, and quite frankly, I'm really happy that some of the meetings I'm in are well documented so that I can remember them. I use this information as reference points sometimes. It may be a series of back-to-back meetings for a while, and then I may not meet on that subject for 6-8 months. And then at the end of that time period, I'll be asked to make a very important decision on it. Well, to freshen my memory, thankfully, if things are done right and public, notices and documentation are kept, I'm able to go back and sort of refresh my memory. What was the latest dialogue? What were the concerns? What were the issues that were there? So I appreciate it in that respect. But that's not to say I haven't also sometimes wished, oh God, I can't believe I just said that, or I can't believe I just wrote that. We're humans, and sometimes we, say things, or you lash out, or you're thinking out loud in an email back and forth. And again, you realize that at some point that can be taken out of context too. But at the end of the day, it's part of your official duties, and I'm really never ashamed that it's there. I just I just have to be mindful of it and sort of make sure that I communicate in a way that facilitates documentation. And also, one of the things that I'm very specific about as just as an elected in an elected role, is that in an elected role, you're there to be in the role that I'm in, I'm there to be the city councilman for District B. But now I also have personal business, I also have professional business, I also have campaign business. But I make very explicit differentiations of that for my communications. I don't ever use an email address for the other subject. If somebody emails me at my campaign address for an official matter, I forward it to my official address and I respond to it from there, because it's easier for me to keep track of it, So I know that if I am requested something, I have those records in the right place, and it's not hard for me to compile it. So, I think it's just a learning lesson and a process, and I'm sure we're all fallible, but it is very valuable, and it is very good resource for people to be able to see how decisions are being made, what information is being shared. I often wish that people had even more access to some of the data points that decision makers make their decisions on, because while I see a lot of the stuff on the city level, I may look at state or federal or some other branch of government, and I may not understand why the dynamics of that conversation are moving one way or another without getting to see what information are they looking at, and what outside influences are in that situation that may not be readily apparent to me. And so, I certainly understand the value of it. I think it's a great thing. But again, we're all humans, and there can be shortcomings of it as well. So it's a developing system. So I think the more we all use it, and the more we all get to understand it and know it, the better and more productive it is for everyone.
It's given the broadness of the subject, and it really is, I think, expanded somewhat to open government, where I think we really thought when we were first asked that this would be focused pretty narrowly just on public records requests. Given the broadness of it, I think the things, and I took some special time today to try to arrive at this, I think the things that matter in the context of what I'm going to say are that next year will be the 40th anniversary of when I first went to work in government. And I've worked in government. It only took me 3 years to decide I didn't want to do that anymore. I've worked in government or very close to government, in politics, very close to politics for those 40 years. And I don't hesitate to tell y'all that I do not trust government. I didn't arrive at that when I had done this for 4 years. I didn't arrive at it when I had done it for 20. I arrived at it somewhere along the way and woke up at some point and realized that I had a very distinct bias against the natural attitude of so many people in government to hide things. It's an awesome thing to contemplate once you've spent enough years to see how over time government broadly, and I don't mean individual particular governments, some of them are much better, some are much worse, and they always reflect the beliefs and the attitudes of their elected leader. Always. I've never seen it fail. I decided somewhere about Katrina time that my life was well enough arranged that I could finally get to do what I think probably I knew for a long time I should be doing. I was in a position where there could not be any kind of political or financial pressure applied to me if I started researching and writing about things that I had learned were of extraordinary importance about what government does. After Katrina, I started doing all of that work pro bono, spent a lot of time down in South Louisiana as that was going on. I've been here, of course, basically all my life, but really came here to start doing some of this more pointedly about 4 or 5 years ago. And what really immediately caught my attention, and I had been here all those years, but I had been in dual residency here in Dallas for 6 years straight, and I came back, and I realized that somehow or another along the way, people's interest in keeping up with what government was doing had been lost. Mm-hmm. Now, I think I understand now how it got lost, and it didn't get lost exactly. It's that we changed so much that the people who throughout my lifetime had bird-dogged government weren't doing it anymore. And I don't know whether they decided they were happy with it or they just decided that they were going to check out. But I could tell that we weren't hearing from them, and I find that that's still the case. In that revelation, which didn't take too very long, I also came to understand that the basics that drive the size and the scope of government were not understood in the community. There was no connection, apparently, between what we pay for government, how many of us there are paying it, and what we do with the government that we have. What struck me about that was that we live in the internet age and we can find that stuff out. The least transparent governments around now still put stuff up on their websites. Now, they didn't haul off and start doing that because they wanted the people to know what was going on, but it's up there. In some places, it's up there in a spectacular fashion. Transparency is, in those places, absolutely what I would call the ideal. Ours in Shreveport and Caddo is not. I decided to focus a lot of attention on that, got sidetracked and started focusing a lot as well on Governor Jindal's administration. But the point is, when you can do that, I think it's something that we should do. And at the heart of it is public records requests, interestingly enough. You get what you are given by a government that doesn't trust people any more than some of us trust government. They think we can't figure it out, so they feel they have to, not Jeff, of course, so they feel that they have to explain it to us. I realized very, very quickly that I was going to have to dig for information that you wouldn't think anybody would even care about just hauling off and giving you. And that's not the Shreveport that I grew up in. That's not the Shreveport I started my business in and grew in, or the one that I reared my son in. That's a different Shreveport. And it's not a better Shreveport, in my opinion. The irony of the public records law in trying to use it in the context that I'm describing, and I always put this in this way. How many of you saw and liked the movie The Verdict? Anybody? A Paul Newman movie. Pretty well known. The point of that movie was that when it comes down to the jury actually deciding a very important case, the jury is at that moment on that day the truth. Whatever that jury decides is the truth. The truth in that context is supposed to be what we call justice. So the famous line from Paul Newman, transferred over to public records requests, is, the Public Records Act does not assure us that we're going to get the information that the public should be able to get. All it does is give us a chance. And that's what the verdict was about. The verdict proves and does in a very creative way, it tells us that you don't go to the courthouse and get justice. You go to the courthouse and get your chance at justice. The Public Records Act is deeply, deeply flawed, and remarkably so. Louisiana is way behind the curve here for a very simple reason. When government stiffs you on your public records request, which happens to some degree or another most of the time in my experience. Remember, you're supposed to be able to get your documents, really, I contend, and Allison may dispute this, may disagree, I think the law says you get them in 3 days. Would you say 5?
I say that the law requires you to give them, the law requires them to give them at the time you request them, not within 3 days. There's only 2 exceptions to the law, and the law allows you, if the record is being used by somebody else, they have 3 days to give you that record, to find it, locate it, and give it to you. And in the interim, they have to tell you who has the record. That's the first exception. The second exception is if there is a valid concern that the record is not public. Then the body has 3 days to decide whether or not the record is public, and then they have to respond to you. In all other cases, the record is due to you upon requesting it. Now they can, you can work with them like if, and I do this often. I'll ask for huge amounts of data for something like, for instance, let's say, I'm taking a look at how police fill out their reports or something. I'll ask for their reports. And obviously, it's going to take some time for them to compile that record for me because they've got to some coding time, programming time, that type of stuff. But the law stipulates that the record is due to you upon request. That 3-day The supposed 3-day rule is really a misnomer, and governments use that. They exploit people's lack of knowledge of the law and use that to their advantage. And here's a real case. The Louisiana Press Association went to bat for us a number of years ago against the AG's office because the AG's office was running a training for public officials. And in that training, the trainer said, you've got 3 days to return the record, to give the record, and use all of it because they'll probably forget. And the Louisiana Press Association said, you better hold up on that one and stop them from doing it. But the law stipulates that there's only 2 exceptions to the public records law, and that is if the record is in somebody else's in somebody else's possession, like they're auditing it or something like that, but they have to tell you where it is. And if they're actually legitimately trying to decide, like let's say I asked for a policeman's file, personnel file, if they're actually trying to decide if whether it's public or not.
I like that a whole lot better than what I was saying, and it leads into the real point that I was trying to make, which is this. The promise of the records that you want is almost always strong enough that you keep working. We are accustomed here to fighting to get the record that we knew in the very beginning was ours in the first place. Now we do that, and you'll never hear this, but this is what we do. We do that because we don't want to fight with a public official from the jump. That's not going to get us our records. Consequently, a lot of us have relationships with staff people who work for elected officials who know they're going to end up doing the work anyway, and they will actually work with us. And that's good. But we have run into a lot more instances where it's just kind of a battle royal from the jump, no matter what. And here's where the second part of the Public Records Act is so good, and I'll finish up with where the great weakness is. The Public Records Act is absolutely phenomenal in a context that we don't discuss, and it's this. When a public official who probably doesn't like you because you're doing a public records request and there's something you want that they don't want you to have, that public official and any and everyone working for them has no right under the law to ask or find out anything about why you want the record.
Mm-hmm. They can ask clarification questions, but that's...
Which has nothing to do with the purpose of the request.
Right.
Now, they confuse the two. Interesting.
Which is what can be so scary about
Exactly. Exactly. So it doesn't matter why you're doing it. And let's just go ahead and use the example. If you know that a public official is doing something with the public's money that he or she can't do, and someone has told you where the document is that will prove that, in all likelihood, somebody in and around that request is going to try to get into finding out from you why you want it. They're trying to judge, what do you already know? And how serious is this for me to try to block this? But the point is, the law, unbeknownst to most people who get requests apparently, absolutely gives them no right to even get into that discussion. A document is a document is a document according to the law, and they're public records and they belong to the people, not to the public officials. Great strength. Here's the ultimate weakness. When you don't get your documents, the truth is you have to hire a lawyer. And I'm not going to beat up on you, Tom, don't worry. This is not any kind of attack on lawyers. The point is, the ultimate defense for a public official who doesn't want to worry about this law is simply to drag it out long enough that you'll go ahead and hire a lawyer and file the suit. Then the worst thing happens. The attorneys who work for the government that you pay for go to work seeing to it that you do not get the documents that everybody knows you have a right to. And that's the worst part of this whole enterprise. And that's where we spend a lot of our time, is fighting these very, very lengthy fights over relatively obvious documents, and everybody knows why you're trying to get them.
And so what happens is you know you have to fight the fight,
Yeah.
and they know you have to fight the fight, and they get away with it.
Yes. And then deliberate obfuscation kicks in. There's a lot of new ways for public officials and those who work for them to technologically create the appearance that either the documents don't really exist, no matter what you thought, or maybe they already produced them and you just aren't smart enough to know that they did, or, in fact, technologically, they can't recover the document, which is absolutely false. In the real world, what brought Ray Nagin down so recently is he tried to get rid of emails that were crucial to what ultimately was his conviction. He used taxpayer money to hire the people who he thought could get rid of those emails, and he had no idea that you couldn't really get rid of them. So the taxpayers in many, many entities ended up paying for the restoration technologically of that which always and already existed. It cost hundreds of thousands of dollars before you got to the prosecution. And that whole thing started when a particular person in the news media knew to go get those emails. It was years before everybody found out. There are stories like that, much more abridged, that are happening right here all the time. So, to me, the public records law here is potentially excellent, and the legislature needs to grossly overhaul it, because the common citizen who wants to know something, the moment they run into someone in the public sector who doesn't want them to have it, they're stuck. And if they don't have the money to hire a lawyer, they're not going to get the document.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight, and I was, let me just say that I was disappointed, and I'm concerned regarding the original sponsors of this event and their cancellation, which is a direct impact on the discussions here tonight. You know, I come from a variety of ways. Elliot and Jeff and the news lady have different perspectives. As a citizen of this city, of this parish, we elect, and let me go back and say that I was in a conversation with somebody on Facebook regarding this event. We talked about how government is so corrupt, is so cluttered, and that you can't even trust. And I think Elliot even said that he don't trust government. And I contend that government is people. Government is people. I believe that who we elect can transform this fear and mistrust of government into something that will be citizen friendly. Caddo Parish, Shreveport has been so hostile to its citizens that it has driven the citizens into being so complacent and so apathetic because they don't believe in them no more. We've lost that connection, and the very governments that are here to serve us, we hire our elected officials. And I think Jeff Epperson said earlier that it's a temporary job at that. Mm-hmm. They're part-time and they're temporary, and yet it appears that no matter who is elected, they take on the culture of the government in which they vowed to help change. So why is that? And we've seen so painfully over the last few years, not only in Louisiana but throughout the country, where corruption, people in government has become such a thing. Where everybody wants to do something to get over, and then they want to cover it up, and then don't want to share information. I contend that there's two tracks to this. I think our elected officials, number one, as it relates to transparency and open government, if they know and understand that they were sent there by the people, which makes them accountable to the people, have an obligation to share information with the people. You know, in Shreveport and Caddo Parish, I think there's very limited elected officials who hold community meetings within their districts to share with their citizens the ongoings and the entities in which they serve. I think that would be one way that they will sort of supersede any suspicions about what's going on by sharing information. That's what it's all about. Open government, transparency in government is to know that the citizens I'm accountable to the citizens. You know, I want to be kept in check. You know, I don't want to get caught up in any scandal or corruption. So I'm going to reveal all that I can reveal as it relates to the ongoings in the body that I'm serving, so that suspicion won't come upon that body. But that's not the case. You know, I mean, a couple of years ago, Elliot and I was working on a situation where not only was transparency lacking, absent, but the hostile environment that citizens, you know, John Q. public coming into the arena of a public body to be treated like we have no right, we have no responsibility of trying to seek information and getting information. And then I think the worst thing about this whole scenario is to be lied to as you attempt to gain information from your public officials. Okay, that tells us that they don't respect us, which has driven citizenry to such a apathy, and they're so cynical that now they're not even paying attention. You know, we found out, and I think that's the most compelling and most upsetting thing about those of us who have paid attention to public. To public officials in public government, is that the citizens in Shreveport and Caddo Parish are not outraged by anything anymore, because they don't think that it's going to ever change. It will change when the citizens demand that it change. You say you want to say something?
I must ask, what situation, what department or what person are you talking about this?
Well, we're basically talking about city government. City government.
Which department, please?
Well, I mean, the information it was several entities that was involved. There was an entity of pretty much a regional entity. Then there was city entities that was all connected with a project that we could not get the proper information from. And I think Elliot is more qualified to elaborate if he chose to.
3132.
Okay, and I'm just saying that we witnessed situations where staff from one entity would come make a presentation to another entity, would bring erroneous information that he had not even presented or was approved from his own board to present, on the request of somebody else to sort of distract or misguide or misdirect, you know, the openness of that situation. You know, but I'm gonna close by this, because I think we're gonna have a real healthy discussion here. That elected officials need to be held accountable. The citizens of this city, of this parish, elect them. They work for us, and I think that the missing component. This is my last statement. And it's directed to the media. Media, the average citizen is not paying attention to government. Okay. I think it's incumbent upon local media to report things that they feel are not proper, and so that the citizens can get engaged. Because I think, again, because we're not getting feedback from some of the horrendous behavior of our elected body, then we don't think nothing's happening, and at the same time it's corroding the structure that we're a part of. And I said to the reporter earlier today that when those emails that Marion read from some commissioners, my position would have been, bring it on. I have nothing to hide. We have nothing to hide. Listen, we can engage in a very open and candid dialogue. I have nothing to hide. And I think that John Settle's article in this morning's paper was very compelling, that on this side of the river, getting public information like pulling teeth. On the other side of the river, it flows like water.
That's weird.
And that's not right. And it's because the public is not outraged and don't seem to be engaged in our public entities. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Tom?
Most of my experience with public record, I'm on both sides of the public records issue because I represent private clients that need government documents and make public records requests. Most of my experience is because I represent some government entities, and they're all small government entities, and they have a very different perspective, and I kind of like to share some of the issues that are faced. The ordinary request for a specific document is almost never a problem, and it can be provided easily. But and most of my clients are honest, hardworking people who are trying to serve their communities, and they're doing a good job. I spent 8 years in local government. I've spent a lot more years representing small governments. And my experience is that most of the people that I deal with, by large numbers, are honest people who don't have anything to hide, who are simply trying to serve their communities. And I found that in dealing with, I don't have any experience being in the state legislature. I don't have any experience being in Congress. I don't know how things work on those levels. But at the local government level, particularly the small local government level, I have found that to be virtually universally true. So what it sets up under the public records law is you accept the fact that it's there, that it's the right thing to do, and that the people have the right to it. But there are some tensions that can arise, and I kind of like to focus on those. I do have, in the midst of all this serious talk, I will remind us, since we're talking about public records, of a very famous set of lines by a very famous Louisiana politician who said, "Don't write anything you can phone. Don't phone anything you can talk. Don't talk anything you can whisper. Don't whisper anything you can smile. Don't smile anything you can nod. Don't nod anything you can wink." And if Earl Long were still alive today, he would say, "And never send an email." And we really don't want government to be in that kind of a context. But there are some developments that have occurred since the passage of Louisiana's open records law, public records law, that are very different from when the law was passed. And one of those things is emails, okay? We used to correspond. We'd either call somebody on the phone, or we would send somebody a letter or a memo, all right? And I can tell you, I've been practicing law for 38 years. And never in all of those 38 years have I received or sent 100 pieces of communication in a day. Never. But a day does not go by today that I don't receive and likely send 100 emails. All right? Now, you multiply that by all the staff people at even I represent the town of Blanchard, have for over 25 years. We don't have a whole lot of employees, but gee willikers, we've got a whole lot of emails. And finding those things and categorizing those things is a real problem. So even when you receive, and most of my clients run public records requests by me, so they can get some guidance, and they are not doing it to find out how to evade it. They are doing it to make sure that they comply with the law. But things come up. I'll give you a couple of examples. Town of Blanchard operates a water system, and so they have water customers. Well, sometimes we can get requests that involve information about our customers, okay? So we're not talking, so I'm always protected, the most protective as a local government attorney. I am most protective when the information that somebody seeks is going to disclose something about somebody who is an innocent bystander who happened to deal with the government because they have privacy interests. In some instances, there are federal laws relating to privacy. And so finding out what can be disclosed, and sometimes the disclosure of that information can itself impose liabilities on a local government. So it is not always easy to find out when somebody gives you a broad request. I mean, the most interesting one involves somebody that made a request to have access to and copy the hard drive of every single computer used or owned by the town of Blanchard. Okay, now obviously we can't do that, but the cost of going through all of that in order to provide what might be available is going to be over $50,000. Now, the town of Blanchard is not a wealthy place, and they don't have a great big tax base. So, we ended up going to court to get some guidance from the court. Now, our first argument was a request for everything is a request for nothing. And there was no specificity. Therefore, there was no request for a public record or a set of public records. There was a request for everything, which we contended was a request for nothing. The Freedom of Information Act, which a lot of open record laws are based on, Freedom of Information Act requires a request with reasonable specificity. That's unclear under the Louisiana law, whether you have to have that. It would be nice to have some clarification. And frankly, from a government perspective, it'd be really nice to have that requirement. Not to make it harder for people to request documents, but to make it easier for government to respond to documents. The second issue is sometimes with emails. Not only do you have a lot of emails, but you have emails and they're everywhere. They're in space, they're in cyberspace. And so actually just collecting them can be really difficult. The Freedom of Information Act, for example, has some provisions in it where these time periods can be extended. The Louisiana law does not. All right? Now, when I'm on either end of that, we're initially going to go and say, when it looks like, hey, this is something that's a legitimate request, but gee whiz, it's going to take us an awful long time to gather it, we're going to call the requester and say, we got it, we can get it for you, but we can't get it for you till a week from Thursday because we don't have somebody that can go pull all this. So one of the other tensions is, because of the short time periods, you have people that have to step away from their ordinary government function in order to comply with some burdensome request. And I'm not saying burdensome in a derogatory way, but sometimes legitimate requests are burdensome. And so then the question becomes, what should be the cost sharing of that information? Should the public bear, that means you and me paying taxes, should the public bear the entire expense of that? Or should the requester bear some of that expense? Well, the public records law talks in terms of copies, as though we now all still make copies of documents. But, Elliot doesn't want copies of documents. He wants them on a disk so he can post them and do the stuff that he does to provide information to people.
That's why they give me documents.
You'll at least have to scan them yourself, huh?
By the case.
That whole concept of paying for copies, what really costs the money these days is paying the people to gather the documents. And should there be a cost sharing involved in that with the person who is making the request? Again, the Freedom of Information Act is a good guide. It sets up a tier in the regulations of what you do and how you can charge. And Commercial folks can be charged for more things than non-commercial folks, and you go through that. We don't have that same kind of clarity in terms of what the cost sharing is. So you have time issues. You have governmental interference with governmental functions, and I don't mean that again. I'm not saying in any derogatory way. I'm just saying that sometimes the gathering of the information is going to take somebody who is supposed to be doing this, and they're going to be doing that, and that impairs the function of government just by its nature. And particularly small governments do not have the resources to have people available whose purpose it is to respond to public records requests. Larger governments may have